Welcome back to the ALTIS podcast. My name is Ella Nelson. I am a former ALTIS athlete and 2016 Australian Olympian, and I will be your guest host for today's episode with another Australian. Today we have sitting on the podcast Tara Thorne, who is a functional nutritionist, and I'm very excited to have her here today. Hello, Tara. How are you going?
Hello, I'm going well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we are excited to have you and chat all things nutrition. And Tara actually specializes in the women's hormone health sector, which in recent times has really become a topic on social media and kind of in more mainstream media, and is definitely becoming a focus in women's sport as well, which is so important. And we definitely have a lot to dive into today. So Tara, I guess we should start off with the basics. Tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you do, and what do you specialize in?
Okay, sure. I'll try to keep it brief. So I am a nutritionist. I'm also what we call an FDNP. And I was born in Canada, actually, but raised in Australia. We were just chatting before about Bondi days. And so I kind of got into this space because I moved back to Canada. Well, I was a baby when I came out to Australia, but I moved to Canada. I met my now husband in Bondi, and he is Canadian. So we moved to Canada. And when we did that, not long after, I experienced really, really bad anxiety, like debilitating, couldn't hold down a job anxiety. And so I went off to the doctor, and the doctor gave me antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills. And that's kind of what started me thinking there's got to be a reason behind this anxiety that isn't a deficiency in a medication, So that got me started on the trajectory of researching health and women's health. And then I had my first baby, and I had really bad postpartum thyroiditis and postpartum anxiety. So that was really horrific. And so that pushed me even further. That's when I really went and started to study and get my first diploma as a nutritionist. And then I had my second baby. I hadn't learned everything I needed to learn. And again, I fell into the postpartum anxiety again. So, and before I had my babies, like I had my fair share of hormonal issues with PMS and, premenstrual migraines and things like this. But those were kind of the two pivotal moments that made me really think there's got to be a way to get on top of these symptoms that is safe and natural and effective. Like there's got to be a root cause. And so that's what I do now, is that functional medicine, which is root cause medicine, right? It's not like a Band-Aid. And I want to preface this by saying I am all for allopathic medicine. I have taken, antidepressants in my time, and they've been absolutely needed and a bridge. And, so many of my friends and family members have benefited from allopathic medicine, but it's not root cause. And I think the reason I do what I do is to get that message out that there's so much that we can do before we reach a disease state or before we need a medication. So if what I do, how I educate can reach someone to prevent them from going down the path I did, then it will all be worth it. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
I love that. Yeah, it's definitely inspiring to hear that, like, from your own personal experiences and struggles kind of led you to study down a path and really like assist and help other women and just others in general with hormone health, because it is something that I feel like in our last few decades has become more and more prevalent, but especially now. And it's really exciting to hear that you don't just have to go, like you were saying about the treatment medicines, like your antidepressants and stuff like that. That is obviously a good, I don't want to say Band-Aid, but something that helps treat and makes others feel better.
Yes.
But really getting to that root cause and figuring out what is actually going on here.
Yeah.
So I guess we can start with a little few scientific questions. So when it comes to women's health, what are the key hormones responsible for women's hormone health and well-being, and what role do they play in the maintenance of overall health?
Yes. And so this is like a really, this is not a question that can easily get answered because we have so many hormones. Like
We are,
estrogen.
as women, we're very complex. We know this, the men know this, it's all
That's
good.
right. Well, the human body in and of itself is so complex. And the reality is we are still finding body parts. It's crazy. So there's not a person on this planet who knows everything about the human body. And then we have like the microbiome, right? So our gut bacteria. Well, that research is in its infancy. So we really don't know much about the gut at the moment. So I think that that can really blow some people's minds when they realize that, yeah, like we really, scientists and doctors don't know it all. We're still figuring stuff out. And when it comes to hormones, so what are the important hormones? There are so many. So estrogen alone, I believe there's more than 60 types, I believe. And so people don't realize this, right?
I didn't know that.
No, because we metabolize our estrogen. Like we've got three main ones: estrone, estradiol, and estriol. And we have these three main estrogens, but then they go through the liver and they get metabolized into these different metabolites. And some of them can be very healthful and anti-inflammatory, and then some can go on to cause some DNA damage. But let me just say, hormones don't cause cancer. But you know, it's so complex. So we've got estrogen, we've got progesterone, but you know what? Testosterone plays a huge role in women's health. Testosterone actually helps to prevent breast cancer. So we can't forget about testosterone. But then we've got thyroid hormones, and we've got so many different hormones. But I guess the main ones that people really think about, I mean, we've got melatonin, you know, but the main ones that are talked about, I suppose, is estrogen, progesterone with women. And then obviously, you know, testosterone. And we've got like cortisol and DHEA, you know, we could go on. But, you know, there's a lot of different hormones to be thinking about. And it's important to think about them all together, you know, not just individually, because they really feed off of each other and work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. It's like, I mean, the endocrinological, like I always mess that word up, but the
That's
system in
right.
general is so complex. And even from my own experiences, like you feel like one of the levels go up or down, even like within your cycle, or if you are suffering from one of the, I like to call them hormonal injuries.
Yes.
As soon as one sets off, they all end up working together in either a bad way and trying to like, and then
Yeah,
and on the other flip side of that, assisting to help bring them back and all balance up again. So it's so interesting
exactly.
to hear like how connected they all are and what is affected. So with that, I guess, what are some of the common hormonal imbalances that we do see in women, and what are the ones that come up?
Yeah, so thyroid issues are really, really common, and mainly sluggish thyroid or hypothyroidism. That's far more prevalent than hyperthyroidism. And just a little caveat there, many women think to have a sluggish thyroid, they have to be overweight. Not true in the slightest. Most women who have a thyroid problem actually have Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune thyroid disorder. And so for anyone listening, if you want to figure out if your thyroid is affecting your health, when you go to your doctor to get blood work, you need to get your antibodies tested. So often our doctors will only test our TSH or TSH and T4. It's not nearly enough. So just a little tidbit, you want to get a full thyroid panel. So it's TSH, free T4, free T3, and your TPO and TGO antibodies. That's the only way to get a true picture of what's going on with your thyroid. So that's super, super common, thyroid issues. Listen, even if those bloods look, quote, normal, and that's a whole nother story, you can still have a thyroid problem at a cellular level. So it gets complex, right? And then we sometimes see estrogen dominance or estrogen excess, and that's simply excess estrogen compared to progesterone. It doesn't mean you have high estrogen. You could have low estrogen and still be like estrogen dominant. And we do see this even in women in their perimenopausal years when their estrogen is getting lower. But in comparison to progesterone, there's more estrogen than progesterone. And then we get these symptoms like fibroids or cysts or fibrocystic breasts or really heavy periods. So that's common. Low estrogen, though, is very common. And I think women tend to think more about the estrogen dominance and the PMS, but low estrogen is a big problem. Estrogen protects us from things like osteoporosis, cardiovascular disease, dementia. When we go through menopause, our risk of those three disease states skyrockets. And it's because we're in a hormone deficient state. So we don't want to just think estrogen's the bad guy. Not at all. Estrogen is protective. Estrogen supports our gut health. Estrogen supports so much. So, common hormonal imbalances, definitely the sluggish thyroid. That's probably the most common. I mean, I think every client who comes to us has some degree of a sluggish thyroid. And then the estrogen dominance compared to progesterone, but also we see the low estrogen. And quite frankly, we also see a lot of low testosterone, especially in women in their perimenopausal years. Then we've got all the adrenal issues, but they're probably not quite as common, I would say, as, say, the thyroid issue. Yeah.
And these thyroid issues and estrogen dominance, do these affect women of all ages, or are they more that perimenopausal group kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. It can affect anybody at any point. I work more with the perimenopausal crowd. I have worked a lot with women in their 30s as well. And, I think I've had some women in their 20s who I've worked with, and they can definitely have issues, but I don't know that typically when you're in your 20s, you're thinking too much about this stuff. I remember my 20s, I was throwing caution to the wind, and I was having a ball. But I do believe sometimes once we hit our 40s, we can get slapped in the face when things do start to change. That's just a fact of life. Our hormones begin to change in our 40s. And I think maybe you had some symptoms in your 30s, but you were managing them, or you thought they were normal, just a part of life, and they're not. If you have a symptom, whether it be hair loss, whether it be fatigue, whether it be mood swings, sleep problems, whatever the symptom is, that is a red flag from your body. And your body is trying to wave this red flag at you. It's trying to get your attention, because if you pay attention to those small red flags, I actually had a friend once who called them pink flags because they weren't glaringly obvious yet.
I like that one. I might steal that one.
It's cool, isn't it? So if you pay attention to the pink flags before they turn into red flags, you could potentially prevent a lot of heartache and a lot of, other symptoms, or worse, So, but I do think there are some women who kind of ignore things or think symptoms are normal in their 30s, and then they enter into their 40s and they go, whoa, this is not fun. And, it's a little bit of a shame, because if they paid attention to the pink flags, maybe they wouldn't feel that way. But listen, our 40s can be a time when, stuff slaps you in the face. But listen, people of all ages can suffer from hormonal issues, all ages. I mean, when I was about 15, 16, I had really bad acne, like not just a couple of zits. We're talking, face, back, chest, like it was very bad. And so there was something going on with me, right? And I was only in my late teens, but no one in my family knew, we didn't know what was going on. But it probably had something in part to do with, well, maybe not just hormones, but yeah, any age really. I just think it exacerbates the older we get.
Yes, that's so true. I'm also wondering, like these pink flags that you mentioned, often in our 20s, women are on, or at 20s and younger in their teen years, they're on birth control. And like that can often like be a bit of a masking agent and like kind of level things out for a while. And then when they are ready to have children and they come off, suddenly these pink flags or red flags that were just kind of laying dormant and not necessarily blowing in the wind are now like very prevalent and obvious and terrifying at that point, because you're like, wait, where has this come from? But really the issue's been there the whole time.
Absolutely, that's right. It can mask the issues. That's so true. And quite frankly, not to go off on a tangent here, but birth control is, if you're on birth control, it's typically a synthetic birth control. That's a drug, right? Make no mistake, it's not a hormone, it's a drug. And you can go on hormones, they're called bioidentical or body identical. But these birth control pills are synthetic. And there's a lot of problems with synthetic hormones. They cause a lot of issues for women. So that's a whole nother topic. But yes, to your point, when you come off the birth control, it's either masked issues that you never addressed, or it has caused issues that have now arisen. Yeah.
Yeah, that one just sprung to my mind as you were explaining the ages and the pink flags and stuff. I was like, wait a second, were we like not aware of these, but like kind of predisposed to them when we were younger? But yeah, I guess tapping more into the sports side of things, and with ALTIS, obviously we're a performance sport organization, and even from my own experiences, I was an elite athlete for the majority of my life, and definitely suffered from a lot of hormonal issues. Some we felt like we were figuring out the cause. We thought maybe hypothyroid, like you mentioned earlier. We thought maybe PCOS. Like there was all this back and forth for a long time trying to figure out this root cause. And as I reflect now, I think that it was most definitely and certainly adrenal fatigue, which you did mention very briefly earlier. So I think we'll just dive into that a little bit, and as it is a term that is very much prevalent in sport and used a lot. Can you explain what this refers to in general, and then also in respect to the HPA dysfunction and what causes adrenal fatigue?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So adrenal fatigue, and I put it in quotes because our adrenal glands, they never actually get fatigued. Our adrenal glands, they don't sort of give up and go, you know what, I'm too tired now. I'm just going to stop. I'm going to stop producing hormones and doing the work I should be doing. So what happens is it's actually a message from the brain. So the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, if you really want to get technical.
I had HPA on my notes. I'm like, I do not know what that stands for.
That's what that is, HPA axis. And so if you want to get technical, you would call it HPA axis dysfunction, not adrenal fatigue. And so it's just like a message breakdown between the brain and the adrenals. And for whatever reason, the brain has said to the adrenals, you know what, let's just put a halt on this for the moment. So the adrenals aren't tired and just fatigued. There's this feedback mechanism that happens between the brain and the adrenals. So there's so many things that can disrupt that HPA axis. And, it could be perceived stress. It could be trauma of any kind. It could be things like parasites, right? Or infections in the body. It can be Lyme, it could be mold, but then, it can be anything that puts a stress on the body, anything. So again, whether it's mental, emotional, or it's a physiological stressor. So excess exercise, intense exercise. There is a U-shaped curve with exercise. We all should exercise. Very important to move our bodies. So no exercise is bad. And then we come along the U, and then we get into that great place of healthy exercise. And then we get to the other side and we see the negative effects of excess exercise. Now, I'm not an exercise specialist by any means, but I do know that too little is too bad, not good for us, and too much is not good for us, because it's a stress on the body. And so if we are, for example, when it comes to running, for example, we know from the scientific literature that everybody who's an intense runner suffers from something called leaky gut to one degree or another, right? Obviously, we're all bio-individual. So leaky gut is when the cells of the gut, they pull apart and stuff starts to leak out into the bloodstream that never should have been there. And when that happens, it generates an immune response and an inflammatory response. And that's when we can get the miscommunication of hormones. Inflammation stops our hormones talking properly. We can burden the liver. A lot of stuff can happen when we have that leaky gut. So if we're doing high intensity exercise, a lot of the time, we're going to constantly be producing this leaky gut. And that's because we shoot up our cortisol. It's a stress, right? And again, there's good stress. Not all stress is bad. But if we are really killing ourselves with excess exercise, for example, or again, working around the clock, type A personality, like there's all kinds of stress. We're constantly shooting up that cortisol. And cortisol is one of our main stress hormones, right? it is catabolic. So it breaks things down. So that includes things like the lining of the gut. We need a healthy lining, a mucosal layer to keep us nice and healthy. So cortisol, corticotropin releasing hormone, these are two hormones that have been shown in the literature to contribute in athletes to this leaky gut. Sometimes runner's diarrhea as well. A lot of athletes get runner's diarrhea. Some athletes are symptomatic, some are not. And then we can get a little bit of ischemic injury, which is when the blood flow isn't flowing to the gut, giving the gut what it needs for nourishment and support because we're running, right? Or whatever we're doing exercise-wise. But the same happens when we're stressed because the body thinks, well, we've got to run from a tiger now because that's our evolutionary, way of doing things. So it directs all that blood flow to other parts of the body, legs, arms, whatever. And it takes it away from the gut. And so then we can get some gut issues. So all of that is to say, why am I talking about the gut so much? The gut is the mothership of hormonal balance. So if your gut is unhappy for whatever reason, your hormones will be unhappy. And that's why I say a lot on my Instagram, you don't have a hormone problem, you have a gut problem. Right. And then if you don't have a healthy gut, you can't absorb nutrients. Well, guess what? Our hormones require to be made, to be metabolized in the body. They need certain nutrients. And I think people don't realize this either. When you look at what nutrients actually make your estrogen, let alone your other hormones, you literally need specific nutrients for the body to synthesize a hormone. So if you can't absorb it because your gut, for whatever reason, isn't working optimally, that's another way you can imbalance your hormones. So I think it's, again, I'm not an exercise specialist, but I think it's super important for athletes to be considering their gut health and how they're repleting their nutrients after their exercise, and maybe countering that excess stress with a lot of calming strategies, getting yourself into that parasympathetic state, meditation, walks in nature, deep breathing, whatever it is, because the body can't heal in that stressed out state. If you're constantly pumping out cortisol, you're constantly breaking stuff down, right? So hopefully that wasn't too much.
No, it definitely like referring back to my training days and my athlete days, even what you were saying about meditation. My coach Stu, he was very much on we would have 2 or 3 days a week where he would have us focus on this parasympathetic state and trying to get there post heavy training sessions or just like active recovery days or whatever it is, to do exactly what you're saying and bring those levels down. Because as a sprinter as well, like we are the definition of high intensity training. Like it's short, sharp, it's stress on the body, it's physical stress, and then like any other small thing, and then you're already at this very high level, and then suddenly it's like your cortisol levels are through the roof. So it is something that is so important to be aware of as athletes or as coaches, and especially with women as well. I think and obviously I'm a woman myself, so I'm not too familiar with the effects of how it affects a man in their training and things like that. But from my experiences, it's definitely so important to, exactly what you're saying, tap into that parasympathetic state and gut health and everything like that, and really be educated. Have you found that there's been more spoken about this topic over the last like 5 or 10 years in relations to your studies? Or I know you mentioned earlier that gut health was in its infancy still. So in terms of your knowledge and learning and where you see everything going, what's your take on that at the moment?
So, I mean, the research is always growing and changing. And I think I'm in a little bit of a bubble because I am in this functional medicine space. And I sometimes forget that, other people, this information is not readily available. It's not, it's like allopathic medicine is very slow to move with this kind of information. So I mean, I was talking to a friend a while back. I was talking about this on another podcast yesterday, and she didn't realize, and I was floored, that cholesterol is not the enemy, that eggs and bacon are not bad for you, that we shouldn't be low fat, that vegetable oil and margarine is inflammatory. She didn't know, and it's not her fault. right? But I
Mhm.
forget I'm in this bubble. So it's a hard question for me, because to me, yes, it's always changing. The research is ever evolving. I actually run a practitioner course all about the gut. And so I have
Awesome.
my finger on the pulse with, and about the ever-changing gut microbiome research. But yeah, absolutely, there's been a huge shift towards gut health in the last, probably 10 or so years in my industry. I think that the general population is really cottoning on to the importance
Mhm.
of gut health. Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen a big shift in that direction.
Yeah, I find myself even now, like I'll be on social media and I'm seeing like infographics and things, and I'm
Mhm.
learning myself continuously about a topic that I
Yeah.
dove into quite a bit because of my own experiences and hormonal injuries or whatever it was that I was experiencing. And it excites me to see that. It's awesome when I walk into a bookstore and I see like all the gut health and hormone
Mhm.
imbalances, like the information readily available, because it is so important, especially when it comes to reproductive health or performance or just general well-being. Like we are such delicate creatures in this crazy world with all these chemicals and everything like that that
Yeah.
we're exposed to daily. Yeah, it's just
We
great
take a
to see
hit.
the change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So another question here we have, what are the signs and symptoms of hormone imbalances or dysregulation on health, whether it be physical, mental, or performance? What are some targets that you see in clients that you're like, oh, this might be wrong here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're talking about symptoms, right? So hair loss, irregular periods, depending on your age, right? You could have really heavy periods. You could be really fatigued, like we shouldn't be dragging ourselves out of bed in the morning. Brain fog, memory issues, mood symptoms. So if I get a lot of clients who say they get rage or anxiety, depression. So a lot of this, like depression, there's a lot of, it's multifaceted, but an inflamed gut will lead to an inflamed brain, and that will
Mhm.
generate mood issues, depression. So PMS, really exacerbated PMS. So things that sometimes women think are normal. And it's funny because that friend who thought that cholesterol was still the enemy and low fat was a good idea and vegetable oils were healthy, well, I was talking to her too, and we were talking about perimenopause and symptoms, and she was saying, well, I think that's just normal for our age. And this is a common thought, that PMS is normal, or symptoms are normal. They may be common, but they're not normal. And that's really important to understand. Those pink flags may be common, but they're not necessarily normal. So like sleep issues, it could really be anything, even excess weight around the midsection. That can be a real indicator of cortisol dysregulation.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's any symptom in the body really is a sign that something's gone amiss, and you probably want to sit up and listen.
That's so interesting. Yeah, definitely, as you were saying, those pink flags and those kind of symptoms is definitely something that we should be paying attention to and noticing. I mean, as we get older, obviously we notice changes within ourselves, but these are definitely something that you need to like definitely flag with your health practitioner or nutritionist,
Yeah.
and all of that. Just a little bit of a sidebar, but so how long have you been studying functional nutrition for? Like, what's the kind of
Yeah.
time frame that we've been looking at here?
Well, it was really in 2007 when I had the anxiety episode that I started to look into health and wellness, and I actually started to write. I was a writer, and I started to write for a naturopath, and then I started to write for various different publications. So it really started then, but then it wasn't until I think 2012 that I did my first diploma. And ever since then, I have just been adding and adding, and I'm never without a course or mentors or a diploma on the go. So it's
I
been
can
a while.
imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you said earlier, the like with it ever changing, I can imagine you're just keeping yourself busy
Oh, yeah.
and on the
It's,
pulse and
it is such a
consistently
strange
reading.
job. Yes, I was talking to a colleague yesterday because it's such a strange job. It's not like, I've had office jobs in my time and you go and you learn your office job and you get to a point where you know it, you know your job, you're really good at it. You don't have to learn much more. The human body, I will never know enough. Never.
Hmm.
There'll always be more. And it can be a little bit overwhelming and frustrating at times because you feel like, oh, now I want to learn about that. Now I want to learn about that. And we're just going to keep learning until the day I die. I'm going to be continuously learning about the human body. So it's quite fascinating.
No, definitely. I myself love to hear more about. I think as humans, we're quite inquisitive about ourselves and in general. So it's
Mhm.
always really exciting when you hear another breakthrough or you learn something massive or you hear about a big breakthrough in medicine and they're like, we've never known about this, but now we found a whole new organ. And you're like, what do you
Yes,
mean?
what? Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
awesome.
Mhm.
And then I guess from like a lifestyle perspective, these hormone imbalances, kind of like what you were saying about the symptoms, but what kind of yeah, lifestyle things do you see these things coming from, whether it be like nutrition itself and poor eating or sleep, or what
Mhm.
are some things that you have noticed cause these imbalances?
Well, it's a great question because functional medicine looks at everything. So we
Mm.
don't just look at one thing, and it is always everything. So it's nutrient deficiencies. Even if you eat like a very clean, healthy diet, you're still going to have nutrient deficiencies because we're stressed and we're surrounded by toxins, and we have poor farming practices that deplete our soils. So there's nutrient deficiencies are massive. When you think about what does the body run on? Nutrients. So if you have a deficiency, it cogs up the wheels, the biochemical pathways. So nutrient deficiencies are pretty much always at play. Inflammation is always a big one. I think most of us have a degree of inflammation, which can come from a variety of different things. Gut pathogens, so pathogens living in the gut. Stress, mental, emotional stress, trauma, go all the time, never slowing down. Obviously, too little exercise, too much exercise, obviously a poor diet, not getting enough sleep, not supporting your circadian rhythm. So a third of our genes are what are called clock genes. And so if you have an out of whack circadian rhythm because you are on your phone late at night or you've got tons of junk light, like light on at night, or you never get morning sunlight, or you're a shift worker, you're going to really mess with a lot of your genetic expression, which is quite dangerous. So getting
Hmm.
morning sunlight into your eyes is really beneficial. And then turning off lights at night or putting blue blockers on, right? So these are a handful of things, but they're the most common things is your lifestyle, your sleep, your stress, not exercising too much or too little. Your nutrient deficiencies are huge. Your diet, blood sugar regulation, eating enough protein. Those are the types of things you really want to think about.
Definitely, definitely. And I can hear how you're already mentioning like certain environmental factors contributing to these hormonal stresses and stuff like that, exposure to chemicals, exposure to light.
Yes.
There's
Mold.
just
Yeah.
mold. Yeah, that's a scary one,
Yes,
absolutely.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just so interesting to see how like this huge multitude of things can
Yeah.
greatly impact something that's quite sensitive by the sounds of things.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. We're very resilient, but at the same time, yeah, we can be very sensitive. So it's a bit tricky sometimes in this day and age. And I think we also have to let go of control, not try to control everything. I see clients who are
Hmm.
trying to control everything to within an inch of their life, but you can't. So you just do your
Hmm.
best. Just do your
And
best. And
that'll end up spiking up the cortisol levels because you're
that's
so
right.
stressed about the environment around
Oh,
you.
100%. It's counterproductive. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's so interesting. So what kind of tests? I know you mentioned like the full thyroid panel earlier, but outside of that, what are some key tests that you would recommend or that you use in your own practice to monitor these hormone imbalances or these deficiency, whether it be adrenal fatigue or excess
Yeah.
estrogen or whatever it is? What kind of
Mhm.
things do you suggest for your clientele?
So we, In my practice, we run 2 tests on every client, and that's a GI map, which is a stool test. And so that looks at your gut. We see, do you have a leaky gut? Do you have markers for that? Do you have infections, parasites? What is your bacteria, the good guys and the bad guys? Because the good guys are anti-inflammatory. So if you don't have many of them, we know you've got massive amounts of inflammation. It shows us your digestive function. So that stool test is huge and really, really important. Then we also do a micronutrient test. So we can tell what minerals are out of balance or imbalance. And that also has a heavy metals component, because minerals and heavy metals, they go together, they dance together. And so that really allows us to see what gaps there are in nutrients, both vitamins, minerals, amino acids. I love those 2 tests. So the GI map stool test and the HTMA, love them together. And then blood work is great because it's relatively inexpensive, but you need somebody who will look at it from a preventative standpoint, the functional optimal range, not the allopathic ranges. But blood work just runs the gamut. You can do so much blood work. Now, there is a test called the Dutch hormone test, which is becoming more mainstream. And the Dutch test is great, and I've run hundreds and hundreds, but you've got to be careful where you spend your money, right? Because if you run a Dutch hormone test, it's going to tell you the what, but not the why. So it's going to tell you which hormones are out of balance, but not why they're out of balance, because the why starts in the gut or with your nutrient imbalances or with your lifestyle, your diet or mold or whatever. So the Dutch hormone test is great, but it will give you more questions than answers. Now, it will show you your adrenal picture. So it's going to show you 2 cortisol readings, which are really important. And depending on which way those markers are going, you can interpret that as maybe a hypothyroid state. So there are elements to the Dutch that are great, but it's probably not, you wouldn't want to do it by itself because it's not going to give you the root causes. But it's an interesting test for sure. Oftentimes, though, I find that money is better spent on these other tests that give you more the reasons behind why you're feeling the way you are. Because the hormones, they're just a representation of your nutrient deficiencies or your gut health or your stress or whatever. Yeah.
So it can often be like almost a starting point, you would say, this Dutch test, to be like, okay, this is like the hormone picture that we're looking at, let's dive deeper? Or would you almost say do
No,
them all
I
in
wouldn't.
conjunction?
The opposite, because unless you've got money to burn, go for it. Run the Dutch too, because it's interesting, sure. But it's definitely, you're going to run that Dutch and then you're going to go, so what now what? I already knew I had hormone imbalances because I feel crazy. Now, with hormone imbalances, you can kind of figure out or a good practitioner can figure out what the hormone imbalances are based on symptoms. So if you want to save yourself a few $100s, then forego that test and go into the other ones because they're going to be more impactful. You're going to have more to work on. But if you're interested and the money side doesn't worry you, then yeah, sure, do the Dutch as well. I've run hundreds and it's a great test, but I just find people are fixated on testing their hormones. It's like, I think I've got a hormone problem, I need a hormone test. No, you don't need a hormone test. You need to figure out why you have the hormone problem. And a hormone test is only going to tell you, it's going to affirm, yes, tick, you do have a hormone problem, but you knew that. You knew that. So why do you have a hormone problem? And that's always going to start in the gut, and it's always going to include gut health and nutrient deficiencies at least.
And obviously, like as individuals, we all have incredibly different readings, and what you were saying about like the allopathic normal versus like what an individual may or not need is so always been kind of interesting to me. Like I know that I run low on the iron side of things, always have, and recently got some blood work done, and they were like, oh, you're 32 within the, like, I think the Australian range was of normal is between like 30 and 160, and they were like, yeah, you're 32, you're fine. I'm like, what do you mean I'm fine? I'm 32, I'm 160. Like that can't be right.
You know what, I think I have even seen a ferritin range of 5 to 220, something insane. It's ridiculous. You can't possibly say somebody at a 6 is as the same as somebody at 199 or whatever. It's crazy. So you want to go off those those functional optimal ranges, which are based on the most up-to-date science. And they're also based on functional medicine clinicians who have been practicing for a long time. So they'll kind of combine the most up-to-date science and the practice of functional medicine doctors and come up with the ranges that put you in a preventative category, not based on an unhealthy population.
Yeah, especially if you are like on the very low end of stuff, it's pretty clear you're like not preventing anything at that point. Like you're already like going to be needing to take extra precautions or supplements or increase iron intake in whatever way based off of that. Yeah, I just was thinking about my own test the other day. I was like, hang on a second.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Absolutely.
And then I guess just bringing this all back to sport again. So from your experiences and your knowledge, how do you think that coaches can best support female athletes to maximize their hormone health and monitor this hormone wellness? Like whether it be from a young age or they're in their mid-20s already and they're pumping the cortisol because of the high intensity. What are some things that you would advise for coaches?
Well, I think like we talked about earlier, I mean, again, I'm not a professional in terms of athletes and whatnot, but I think what we spoke about earlier is probably vitally important, is supporting that parasympathetic nervous system, because athletes would be in that upregulated nervous system state so often, maybe emphasizing more that parasympathetic state and what it is they can do to get down into that parasympathetic healing state. I think it would be great for athletes to be doing tests like the GI map combined with that HTMA is a gold mine of information. And then if you work with a practitioner who understands those two tests, you can run those tests once or twice a year, and then you get custom supplements that are right for you. So you're not guessing, right? So that you're actually putting things in your body that are supporting you whilst you're doing that training, that are filling in those nutrient deficiencies, those gaps, or supporting that mucosal lining in the gut, which are taking a beating from the training, but you can supplement to support your body. So probably doing those tests, keeping a good eye on your blood work, really making sure you're in that parasympathetic state. And then obviously diet is so important, right? I'm sure you guys talk a lot about diet. I'm sure that with your coaches, you speak a lot about macros, maybe even more than I do, but making sure that diet is top notch, right? And not filled with obviously junk foods and processed foods. You want to be fueling your body with really good animal proteins and lots of different vegetables and good quality, like low GI fruits and things like this. So I reckon testing the custom supplements, parasympathetic state, and the diet are probably, when you focus on those four things, whether you're an athlete or not, you're doing the best you can for your body.
Absolutely. I think it's quite crucial nowadays, especially with elite female athletes, to have someone on their team who understands that functional side of hormones and the impacts that they have. And I would say, as my piece of advice would be, to seek out someone who understands that and have them a part of your squad and your team going forward, because it is so sensitive and things can change very quickly, unfortunately, as well.
Yeah, very true. It's good advice.
And then I'm just thinking from myself now. I mentioned earlier on the call, I'm actually 28 weeks pregnant at the moment, which is crazy, but very, very fun. I suffered from a lot of hormonal imbalances during my athlete days, and just being younger, I always had acne and was quite afraid. Like there was a period of time where I didn't have a period for like 10 months and I wasn't on any birth control. It just my levels were so out of whack that it was like, nope, we're not going to do this for a while. And I was quite fearful that I would be or have troubles falling pregnant or be infertile or whatever it is down the line. Is there any advice that you would, clearly that wasn't my issue because we're all good, but do you have any advice for women who have either experienced these hormonal injuries or who are elite athletes in sport. You hear about this a lot all the time, like young female gymnasts who work so hard that their hormones are just like all out of whack, in terms of reproductive health and that opportunity going forward. Is there anything you might want to add to that kind of conversation?
Yeah, it's interesting. As we've been talking, I actually remember I've got two clients. Oh, well, one at the moment, I had one previously, and they were professional volleyball athletes, actually, and they had their fair share of hormonal issues for sure. In terms of advice, I think it's the same as what we just talked about. And, you know, like with gymnasts, like that's scary, right? Like, because I think there's such pressure to be a certain weight that there's probably a lot of disordered eating. So that's a whole nother ballgame, right?
Yes.
And, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, I wish there was a magic pill that we could say, okay, so take this pill, but continue the training you're doing, the way you're doing it, continue to lose weight, don't eat much, calorie count, blah, 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 and you'll be okay. But there's not. And the reality is, people need to make a choice. And if they're suffering with these, like you say, those hormonal injuries, or they're losing their period, or they're concerned about fertility, there's a hard choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a sacrifice.
It's a sacrifice. And if you do all those things we spoke about previously, I think you're doing the best you can. And if you choose to continue doing something that's not agreeing with your body, you know, that's okay. That's your choice, but you do need to make that choice. But maybe if you do this parasympathetic work, maybe if you're eating better, maybe if you're doing the testing, getting yourself custom nutrients, maybe that's enough to support you whilst you're in that season of life, when you're doing the training and when you're a bit harder on your body than you will be later. And things may be completely fine. But I think that's the key, is to do those things to support yourself. Because if you're training, like I know people that aren't athletes. Well, I guess they are athletes. They do marathons, right? And
they're definitely athletes.
But they do not support their bodies. Like they do not eat correctly. And you can, you know, it's scary to watch, because you know that they're going to be they're going to have issues. You know, but they're those that's not their it's not their job, but it's their hobby, intense hobby, to be an Iron woman or to be a marathon runner for sure. But they're not doing it in a way that is, they're looking at their nutrition, they're looking at their nervous system, they're running the right testing. But it's even more important for those people to be doing that stuff than the average person who's not running marathons. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like protective information, whether it be from your testing or knowing like what nutrients you need.
Preventative.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. It's the best you can do.
Yes, and I think that's what we are all doing, is the best we can with
right,
everything
100%.
and continuing to learn all about the hormones, health, gut health, how everything is interrelated and ultimately impacts performance, whether it be day-to-day performance in your office job or the elite athlete stepping out to perform in an international level. Yeah, thank you so much, Tara. Did you have any closing statements or anything you wanted to leave us with today?
No, I don't think so. I think just prevention is key, and you just do the best you can. There's no guarantees in life. No guarantees, right? Everything is so complex when it comes to health. You just do the best you can, and you do what you enjoy in life. You don't sacrifice things you love necessarily. Like you do the best you can, and then you support yourself the best you can whilst you're doing those things, and enjoy life.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Well, thank you again so much. I've really enjoyed this chat, and I've definitely learned more than a few things myself. I'm still stuck at the very beginning of the conversation, honestly, when you said there's 60 different types of estrogen. I'm like literally mind blown by that, like almost an hour later. But again, thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for listening today. And we will see you next time for another ALTIS podcast. Farewell and have a great day. Thanks, guys.